Well, good afternoon, good morning. My name is Tom Jenkins. I'm absolutely delighted that you're able to join us for this webinar. I'm going to pause a couple of moments just to let the delegates spool in. So those of you who are joining us immediately, just we'll have to wait maybe 10 or 20 seconds just to allow everyone to come and join the webinar. Well, hello again. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Adele Youngs, the Director of Live Travel and Tours, and she's a former chair of SITA, the Student Youth Travel Association. We have Marcy here, Marcy Ellison-Outbridge, who is the current president of SITA, and she's also the General Manager of Ellison Travel. And I'm also delighted to be joined by Tim Sweeney, the Chief Product Delivery Officer of WorldStride. So we've got three very distinguished guests here to act as a panel. My role today really is just to introduce this webinar. And what I'll be doing at the end is I'll be trying to field the questions and answers, which I hope you will be posing in the Q&A area, which you should see at the bottom of your screens. It's really good to have as many questions as possible. We'll try and answer as many as possible, but it's great to have a dialogue. And we've got three top experts in this field to answer them and to help illuminate what's an extremely important area. And our site has very kindly sent me some slides with data on it. So I'm going to run through the slide presentation as a quick prelude to our discussions today. So bear with me while I share my screen. Right. Hope you can see the slides. Can you see the slides, everyone?
Not yet, Tom.
Right. Interesting. I'll do it again. That's it. I think we're there now, yeah? Yeah, good. All right. Student and youth travel by numbers. I hasten to add these slides, and indeed the webinar as a whole will be on the ETOA website later on, and anybody who wants to look at these can do so. We may even be posting this slide deck on our Insight Hub as well. The point about student and youth travel is that it represents 26% of all global tourism. It's estimated that the student and youth market will reach 300 million arrivals globally by 2025, and it's got a $320 billion market value, and is definitely driven by the increase in middle class globally. So we're seeing student and youth travel increase not just in North America, which is the topic of our discussion today, but it's a booming market in the Far East as well. If you look at what happened in 2021, well, it didn't look very good. Those people in North America, students taking an international trip, it was a fraction of what we normally anticipate. The good news is that 2022, and I think this is an estimate figure for 2022, showed a spectacular recovery over the 21 figures. I mean, it's nearly over three times the volume that we saw in 2021. Now, the preliminary data is what percentage of your customers change their international travel plans. Obviously, this just gives you a picture of quite how many people just postponed their travel or cancelled it. I mean, a really significant portion. Maybe the panel will be able to say what the other factor is in this preliminary data question, because that represents a very significant percentage of other reasons for cancelling or postponing a trip or other activity, really. But in general, you'll see that there is a significant decrease in cancellations from 20 to 21. But beyond that, it would be good to know more from the panel what they expect in 22 and 23 on this. Again, if you look at the preliminary data, this is for the preliminary data back in 2021, the average trip duration seems to be increasing. The size, it seems to be decreasing, but that's probably within the sample range, around about mid-30s number of students per group, roughly 10 days, as opposed to nearly 7 days in 2020. So the group size is probably roughly the same. There's a marginal increase in, or a significant increase in the length of stay. These key performance indicators will still show you some data. I mean, that there is a year-on-year comparisons based on data tour operators. It is still showing, domestic travel down. What's interesting is that the international travel is not down as significantly as domestic travel. Again, this is historic data dating from 2021. And lastly, this gives you the sort of social impact of student group travel, and this is the sort of impact that it has. And I will leave you to meditate on that. And when you look at it on our website, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but it shows you that the impact of student travel goes well beyond the purely financial impact of people arriving and spending dollars, both in terms of their own growth and also what the destination learns from them. Tourism is a learning process, not just from what happens to clients, but what clients do to destinations. And this explores some element of that. I will now stop sharing my screen. Just as a parting shot, really, I think student travel, and it is indicated by that last slide, really has an extraordinary impact. It obviously has a significant commercial impact, particularly in those months that you see students arrive in Europe. And it's very interesting that this impact is not concentrated in normal tourist zones. A lot of the student groups specialize in family stays, and they really penetrate the wider community in a way that other groups tend not to. I think the other factor is that it is extraordinary how much of the inbound tourism industry in Europe is dominated by people whose background lies in student tourism. If you look at ETOA itself, our former president, Jack Corona, started as a 16-year-old guide. He shouldn't have been working quite at that age, but he was, as a 16-year-old guide, taking Americans into Europe. One form of youth tourism was actually making sure that the tour guide is underage. But but his family came from a long tradition at ACIS of bringing groups over to Europe. A large proportion of the secretariat at ETOA owes its background to youth tourism. And indeed, ETOA itself was founded by youth and student tour operators back in 1989. So with that thought, I'm just going to hand you over to Adele, who will try and answer some of the questions which were raised by the slide deck. Chief of which, how would you go about defining youth and student tourism? I will hand you over to you, Adele.
Thank you, Tom. And I do just have to apologise in time-honoured fashion. The minute we started the webinar, you can tell it's live, a police helicopter has started circling over the streets outside. So I do apologise for any news. Hopefully they won't be breaking into the building or anything. Thank you, Tom, for that. Thank you as well for the opportunity to talk about this really important sector today. And as Tom said, many of us have, if not currently worked in student travel, have done so at some point during our careers. And in order to define that, because obviously that's quite a broad a statement, student and youth travel, and a little bit for the parameters of this discussion today, what we're particularly talking about is educator-led groups of students. So these could be school age, they could also be university or college age, but the sort of defining element around that is that they are a group and they are led by an educator or a band music director or a sports coach or a faculty member. So there's an element of education involved in these types of tours. They're not the sort of independent backpacker type of trip. So just to give a definition of what we're specifically talking about. And again, the remit of the webinar is very much focusing on the North American market to Europe. And so my company is very much an inbound receptive operator in Europe. But I'm delighted as well that we have representatives with Marcy of the Canadian student sector and with Tim with the US. So hopefully for your questions, we can cover between us pretty much anything you want to ask. So what I wanted to start the discussion really, and I should also say that the three of us are board members, and Marcy, the current president of CITA, the Student Youth Travel Association, as Tom mentioned. And so we're very much focused together with our other board members and members of that association on collecting data, on understanding the market, on promoting it, and on helping people become better at it as much as we can. So Marcy, I wonder if you could perhaps start by talking about what you see as the main characteristics of this segment. Obviously, we've got, like anything else, a pre, and a during, and a post-pandemic scenario. But putting those aside for the moment, what do you see as the key characteristics that drive this sector of the tourism business?
Thanks, Adele. So as you mentioned, the student and youth market that we're working with is that these pre-formed groups with special interests. They're traveling together with a common goal, common curriculum, that type of thing, and they really do travel together to learn together, and strictly often on, as Tim also mentioned a bit, on what we would consider the shoulder seasons in, what would be the spring and Canadian and North American timeframes. So that is another key aspect of this market. Yeah, so that's kind of the basics.
And how do you feel that the fact that these are obviously, one of the things we do talk about in this is that unlike some types of group tourism, there are almost three clients involved in the decision to take a trip. There's the teacher or the educator who's leading the trip. There's the parents who are usually paying for it, and then there's the students themselves. And how do you feel, in particular, Marcy, with the young age of the people on the trip, the students, how do you feel that contributes to the inclusions and the theme and so on of the trip?
Yes, well, I think that it is usually a collaboration with the tour operator, with our receptive partner, especially in Europe, and the teacher and the curriculum goals, and sometimes their board to determine what it is that they're seeking to accomplish. Getting out of the classroom is so important, and the teachers are trying to bring that classroom alive through all types of different aspects of travel. And so yeah, it's a real collaborative effort, and we'll talk a bit more about what that means post-pandemic as far as working with school boards and so on a little later. Thank you.
And I think one of the other things that we're seeing, this sort of perhaps lends a little bit also to the future trends too, but is this young age group are very focused on sustainable travel, diversity in what they're seeing, and making sure that the visits that they're going to reflect the wider, more diverse community, perhaps than maybe in the past. Marcy, have you found any particular things that, for example, CITA is working on some of these projects. What have you found groups are particularly maybe looking for in that?
Yeah, I think that definitely there's a more of a focus on, in connecting with the local communities, as Tim sort of alluded to there as well. Prices are going up, so it's hard to sometimes have a real an expensive experiential travel experience, but trying to find ways to go out into sometimes smaller communities and connect with and invest in those communities is something that we're trying to do a little more of, and we're seeing a little more demand, and that's coming for sure. Again, in working with whether in North American Indigenous populations or local communities, depending where they're traveling as well.
Great, thank you. And then Tim, if I may move to you from an operational standpoint, again, putting the pandemic aside for a moment, what are the sort of the key operational elements that have typically identified this type of travel?
Yeah, it's great. Well, thank you, Adele. So I think pre-pandemic, I think it seems like, first of all, it seems like a lifetime ago. And I'm suddenly realizing how much easier it was to operate than the environment we're in today. So I think just to give everybody a little bit of a taste of the environment pre-pandemic, we as a tour operator in tour operator industry, we were all fully staffed. Booking lead times were 18 months. The cost of sales were more predictable, allowing us to build, more reliable forecast models. The airline capacity was predictable. The land capacity was predictable. Our list of suppliers, a lot of people on the phone here today, that we work with were financially stable and tenured teams and long relationships that we've had. Our sales account management teams, our operations teams, were tenured and strong. And, we did have, you see a theme there, I think, losing some of that, subject matter expertise, some of that relationships along the way has been a bit of a challenge. But I think that's where pre-pandemic life was much simpler. And I think, a couple other big challenges that we dealt with pre-pandemic were mostly around capacity. We had so much FIT and group business into some of these key cities around key dates. It was challenges around how do we navigate inside of those type of environments. And I think that was a really nice problem to have compared to where we're at today. The other thing that was pre-pandemic, again, seems like a lifetime ago, that's still in the market, was there was a worldwide global shortage of coach drivers that was really hitting the market. That has been a real operational challenge pre-pandemic that continues today to a different degree. So I think those things were kind of give you a taste a little bit about what the environment was like pre-pandemic. And then I know we're going to talk a little bit about post-pandemic and what the environment's like today a little later.
Thank you. And just to, again, give some context for the types of tours, I mean, we were looking at the statistics that Tom showed us earlier, and the average length of trip, which may be a surprise to some of the attendees, is 8-9 days. These are not short trips. They are a very significant investment on the part of the family of the student who is paying for the trip. And so I think one of the things that's important to remember with these as well is that if we're looking at the income, as it were, brought to Europe, these specifically talking about North American trips into Europe, that the value of these trips financially is also significant. They're coming for a long time. Many inclusions are put into the tours. They, unlike maybe the adult group market, for instance, where there's a lot of free time perhaps built in and they'll go and do their own thing for meals. Student groups tend to move around as a group all the time. So they'll have many meals together. They'll have pretty much the whole day structured with activities, with visits. Most teachers don't want the kids, depending on their age, sometimes maybe the teenagers, maybe they want to keep closer than the younger ones, I don't know. But they certainly want to schedule as much as possible into the trip to get the full value for the experience that they're having, but also because they're young people and they want them to keep busy so they sleep well at night as well. So I think when we're looking at this sector, as you were saying, Tim, the relationship with suppliers is so important because there are so many of them involved in the student trip, perhaps more so when you look at it as a whole than there would be in a similar length adult trip. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, either of you.
No, that was spot on. I think, yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know if I jumped out there, but no, it was spot on, Adele. I think the supplier relationship's mission critical. And to your point, I mean, a lot of these students are paying $3,000 plus for these type of experiences. And I think making sure that we're providing on the ground experience that's fitting what their needs are, it's a collaboration between us as a tour operator and all the suppliers and partners that we work with. The other key thing that I didn't touch on is our tour directors. Our tour directors are mission critical in terms of what they deliver on the programs. And I think we felt a little bit of a change there, right? So a lot of the last couple of years, you had tour directors that were always available. Well, when you don't have work, I think you do find, is it time to switch? Is it time to do something different? So building that whole pool of the people that provide the most important part of the experience has been a challenge too. But all those pieces going together really make for a great product. But again, to your point, it's that partnership with everybody that really puts that whole concoction together.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can add to Adele, just to your comments about the student, group characteristics that, this a couple of things that are unique with the student market is, well, first of all, of course, they are, sponges. They're very considerate, curious, visitors, and they really want to do everything. Like you're saying, there's a lot of structure, there's a lot of spend in the market with they're including meals and they're including attractions. That it's very structured. There's a lot of going into the itineraries. They're repeating itineraries. They're returning. If they get into a destination that meets their curriculum goals, they're returning. They're coming back. They're not really one hit wonder. And then they'll return with their families or as a backpacker. So there's a real loyalty that is built up when they want to go share their experience from their teenage years because they're so impressionable. So I think it's that's another comment about the characteristics. And also I think moving forward, student travel is somewhat recession proof. And I'm sorry, I guess I get a little bit into post-COVID, but this is, I think, what I'm saying is the student market has some resiliency no matter what's happening. And part of the reason I say that is that what we've experienced is that families will actually send their child on a student trip versus maybe take the whole family to Europe. So if they can't afford to go as a family, they'll make sure that their son or daughter gets on that trip to Europe and has that life-changing experience. So there's just a couple of things to think about there. I also like to say they're the least supportive of Airbnb and booking platforms. And I'm sorry if anyone's on here from that, but these are hotel stays, these are room nights, these are not VRBO and Airbnb. And I'm sorry, those have a place for the right traveler, but they are, coming into cities and staying in hotels and for multiple nights. So there's some small, things to mention that are benefits to the destinations that are welcoming the student market. Did you want me to say, Adele, too, sorry, a bit more about we're dealing with, as I mentioned, curriculum focus, which could be anything from history to science, maybe just to quickly share in case people are new to the student travel, historically, history, science, language, performance, tours, music and language exchanges, and even maybe more so, it's just become more and more diverse to robotics and textiles and fashion. It's just amazing what teachers want to offer their students to bring the classroom alive. And so those are a couple of other areas that we can bring students to almost any part of Europe to see those things, right? It's a great destination from that perspective. And back to the positive impact, teachers know that this has a major impact. Student travel really impacts their students in terms of tolerance and respect. And so it's just a unique market in that way. I think that, again, back to that very impressionable, and really impacts teachers believe that travel impacts their students at school as well. So I just wanted to highlight there's really some of those benefits on the side of for student travel, that it does change. Our tagline with CITA, one of them is that travel changes young lives for good. So it's a great market to work with.
Absolutely, and really valid points. Thank you, Marcy, particularly about how the importance that families will place on that, having their kids do the school trip. And we all know from the pandemic how much that impacted, having to be at home, having to have online learning. It kind of gave us all, I think, an even bigger sense of the importance of that opportunity for young people to go away with their peers. And not only are they learning the educational part, but they're also learning how to be culturally aware, how to be in a different environment and learn from that. And so that's one of the very interesting things about this type of travel, is the inclusions that we're able to offer are much more diverse in those ways. So I think that brings us really nicely onto where we are now. As we've said, there's a sort of financial resilience, but we are coming out of a pandemic that had impacts none of us in the industry could have foreseen. So, Tim, how are you, from CITA doesn't yet have a huge amount of data for looking forward. We're in the process of collecting that right now, obviously, which we can share in the future. But what are your insights into 2023, 2024, and how we're looking with bookings and so on?
Yeah, so it's actually coming back pretty robust. 2023 is roughly 90% of where we were in 2019 pre-pandemic in terms of total world travelers. Europe continues to drive that from our view. Europe is always one of our primary markets for the students. And I think if you look at it, it's always France, Spain, and Italy. Not in that order. I think it goes a little differently. I think it actually goes Italy, France, in Spain, in that order for our standpoint. But those markets are mission critical. For 2024, our season is really just beginning. I think we do about an 18-month prior booking patterns. And we are, even with our heavy focus on 2023, we're already out of the gates with a stronger 2024 than we were in 2019. So the travel is coming back, the students are coming back. There's some destinations outside of Europe that are still a challenge. I mean, obviously, China used to be a sizable destination for us. That's going to take some time to repair and come back. Peru right now, we're seeing a shift. And some of these shifts are happening within the same continent, and other are happening where we're repositioning some of these groups to places like Europe. So we see a good variety of real positive trends here. And I think it's a combination of pent-up travel and that just general demand that's coming back. One thing for 2023, which is an interesting factor for us, is we are finding our average count of groups is down about 20%, but our number of travelers on each of those groups is up 20%. So I think that mirrors what we're seeing in the industry, where a lot of school boards and administrators they still may be hesitant about approving these trips. We've also had a tremendous amount of our teachers who have retired early or taking a change of out of the educational field. It's been a tough couple of years, of course. So I think we're seeing that group leader in approval process a little behind, but the pent up demand around the individual students is extremely strong. So if we can get the two to get it back in alignment, I think you're going to see an incredible 24 and 25 really start to materialize. Now, there's a whole list of additional challenges we face as we get this volume back, which we can touch if we have time as well.
Great. Thank you. And Marcy, coming back to you, because I know this is something you're working on with CITA as well, and encountering in the Canadian market as well, particularly, is this issue around school boards. And perhaps for those particularly on the webinar who are not so familiar with the process that has to be undertaken by a school, could you maybe talk a little bit about how that works and what the particular challenges are at the moment?
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. So to kind of add to Tim's comments, I mean, in Canada, we're a little bit behind the American, we had a more conservative response to COVID. So we're coming out a little bit later. We had, a lot of school boards were approving domestic travel, some what we call transborder to the US, and in fewer internationally for this school year. But again, to Tim's point, we're seeing a lot more interest for next year, more back to typical demand and inquiries and so on. So we're just probably a little bit behind. So I think we will see a little shorter lead time from Canadians anyway. We like to be that 18-month out too, Tim, for international normally. But right now we're at that stage where maybe the US was last year, which is quick, want to go sooner, right? So we're probably going to see a bit shorter lead times from Canadians, but we're coming back. However, yes, the school board. So I think that, we're hearing from all of our members, not just in Canada, that we kind of have a mix of reaction post-COVID from school boards as far as either very intensely inserting themselves into the process and more than in the past, or these trips are community-based, teacher sponsored, not board related. So we're kind of seeing, we're in a bit of a flux as far as that in the different states and provinces. But for those, who are going through a process of approval. Teachers definitely have to submit a lot more paperwork. So site is working on providing our members more information to help get them through that process of approval for trips. So they need to show there's a reason they're leaving the classroom, that it's educational in nature, that it's important, and there's a lot more work on their side. So we're trying to support that. And on the flip side, you know, some of the school boards are putting our tour operators through we have to jump through a few more hoops to be on their approved vendor list, and to show that we have a robust risk response, crisis response, you know, duty of care program. And that is something that we are, again, focusing on to help our members prepare and plan for. And we're seeing more demand. We have the Certified Student Travel Organization, a certification through the Center for Student Travel Safety. And we're seeing some real interest in that from the school boards, to know that there is some procedures in place. Nonetheless, sighted members in general have access to a number of resources to help them with all of this generally. So I think, yeah, we're seeing that probably in general more interest in the school boards and being involved, and we may need to pass that on to our suppliers, as far as we need to understand what is the emergency exit, you know, what is your seatbelt rules. You know, all of our suppliers may find there's more questions about their insurance, or more information like that we then need to provide to the schools to provide to their school board. So that is something that's probably we're seeing a little more of after COVID.
Absolutely, and I think Tim, maybe you can add to that on the health and safety side. That certainly with any type of tourism, obviously health and safety is a very much a top priority for anybody involved. But particularly when we're talking about young people, it's really top of mind of the clients. And with the COVID situation, I think it's something, and insurance and all that side of it, that's definitely really now important, and especially in terms of documentation, paperwork, as you're saying, Marcy, that needs to be submitted to the schools to back that up. Tim, you're working on some health and safety protocols and so on with CITO. Could you give us a little bit more background on the sort of things that we're being asked and what's coming up from the school boards and so on?
Yeah, sure. So I think Marcy covered a few things, which has been great. So I think in general, the theme is, you know, a lot of subject matter expertise has been lost at both our tour operator and, you know, supplier levels, you know, especially with the companies being mothballs for a few years as we kind of survived. So I think we're trying to make sure we're rebuilding the health and safety is front and center inside of the industry. So a lot of us are really going through, and whether it's the CITO protocols or our own internal tour operator protocols, we're trying to modernize basically all the product protocols and procedures inside of our industries. We're trying to rebuild the crisis plans so they're relative to today's needs. As I mentioned, we lost so much of our staff. So we're making sure new staff are really brought up to speed as quickly as possible to bring them to the levels that we had prior to COVID. We're going to be working a lot with our partners to make sure that how they handle crisis overseas, abroad, you know, domestic, wherever they're going to be, are to the levels that we need them to be participating at. So we're working as one seamless unit. We're going to be closely monitoring world situations in a different way. And to your point, Adele, mental health, well-being of our travelers and our staff is front and center in a different way as we've gone through COVID, especially, and making sure that we're mindful of it, making our teams aware of these challenges and how to best be aware and deal with those situations, whether on tour or pre-tour, become something that's really important in the health and safety field.
Absolutely, and I think coupled with that, as we touched on a little bit earlier as well, there's the sustainability element too, as particularly as the young people, I think, are driving this to some extent about wanting to know the sustainable procedures in place, as well as the crisis procedures and so on at many of the places that they're going to stay in and visit. I think as we're kind of wrapping up this part of the webinar, as we come towards time for some Q&A, I wondered if I could just ask you both, there may be people on the call who, whether they're a supplier or a tour operator, have not yet had much experience, but would like to get more involved in this particular sector. And do either of you have any top tips for either a supplier or an operator about how they could get involved, basically. Marcy, do you want to start off?
Well, I think definitely connecting with SITA members is a good start. We're looking for partners in both the supplier and operator side, and there's definitely opportunities there. We have an international affiliate membership, which could be of interest, something just it's a way to connect with SITA on a more global level. And so that's one thing. Maybe if Tim has something, I'll see something else comes to mind.
Yeah, I think overall, I think I mentioned it earlier, but the industry really saw a big loss of talent over the past few years, and understandably so, I think. So I think we're looking to rebuild. So anybody that is ever interested, we as tour operators are always open. I know a lot of the suppliers that we work with are looking for talent to come on board. So I think that's always available. We also are always able to talk. I always am available, others inside of our industry, to just find out and just talk to us personally about what's involved with getting involved in the tourism industry.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I started. I did a student tour many years back, so that's really cool, made an impact. How do I get into this industry? And I was fortunate enough to talk to people that had a lot of experience and people that own companies that gave me that insight. So I take that as very strong piece that I want to give back as well, and always available if anybody needs to talk.
Mm-hmm. I did think of one other thing, Adele. I think that one thing is what we've seen with different destinations or cities or countries, wanting to get involved in student travel, is to try to bring it with your partners in your destination. If there's just a couple of attractions that want to bring students in, but the hotels are not on board, or so if you're in the destination sphere, I think that having all parts of the sector on board and coming together to say, we want the student business, we'll have youth pricing, youth rates, things like that. Sometimes we find that that's not always there. So yeah, I think working together, and that's can work with receptive and tour operators as well, to come together to say, let's build a package or something that's appealing for this market with some of their needs and wants. So
thank you. And just to add to that, I think from the European perspective, I know when I go to ETOA's events such as GEM, it's really helpful to me when I'm meeting suppliers if there's a thought process maybe around how young people can interact with that particular attraction. For instance, that kids these days were born after mobile phones were prevalent everywhere. They don't know how to interact with things necessarily so well without some kind of technology even. So if you have that in your venue, then shout about it. That's exactly the kind of thing that the groups are looking for, with hands-on technology, STEM, all these sorts of themes are very important. And I would say as well for the European attendees that ETOA is doing a great job of pushing as well the needs of this market segment, as Tom mentioned right at the beginning. So coming to European events organized by ETOA are another excellent way to get into understanding and learning around this sector if you're not already in it, and if you are, of networking more extensively. So I will hand back over to Tom. Thank you both so much. We'll just keep you with us for the moment. And Tom, please could you let us know what questions have been coming in?
Indeed, I'm really rather haunted by the idea that these people are born after the arrival of smartphones. I almost want to have, I also almost want to have questions arriving by telex. Just to have a kind of retro feel to this, but unfortunately, I don't think anybody has a telex machine clanking away in the background anymore. We have questions. We've even got questions by email. I'll actually start off with one from Mike Clark by email, which is simply to ask, and this is a sneaking feeling a lot of youth operators have, which is to say, do you believe that US and Canadian school and regional boards now support international travel? The implication was that they were very concerned about or slightly reticent to doing so. So do you think there's been it implies that there was a pullback beforehand? Do you think there's a real enthusiasm for international tourism on behalf of the school boards. I'll throw it over to Adele to start off, and then we'll go around the table.
Well, I think we obviously being here aren't dealing directly with the school boards, but certainly from our experience with inquiries that are coming in at the moment is that some aren't, but a lot of them now are back on board with international travel. I think, Tim, you alluded to that the numbers of groups may be down because some schools are still, or the school boards are still waiting for perhaps another season to make sure everything's kind of back up and running, but that the ones that are now full steam ahead. Tim, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
No, it's great. I think the general vibe that I hear is that the school boards are very enthusiastic about the experience, the education the students get. They continue to have, a lot of stopgaps and trust but verify around health and safety protocols that we have inside of the industry. So I think that's why health and safety becomes so critical and why we're updating and modernizing all our process, because it not only gives peace of mind to the school boards, but it also is critical for us to operate. So I think to answer your question, I think we're finding we're not quite back. If I was to put a percentage on it, I'd say we're 80% of the way there. And 20% will get there. I just think it's just happening a little slower, and they just want to go through some more checks and balances.
Thank you. And Marcy, I think Canada is probably similar.
Yeah, I would say it's similar. And again, I mean, Canadians we were maybe slightly behind, so we're a little bit behind, but we're seeing more and more interest. Lots of interest. Again, as Tim said, the teachers they know the value of getting the students over and to Europe and internationally, and we're having inquiries for the usual areas and destinations, and some of them are getting stopped at the board level, but I think it's only getting better for us too.
Great, that's good news. Thank you.
That's excellent news. No, I think it's I think just for a word out for the school boards, they have a binding responsibility to be seen to be putting the welfare of their children first. And it's not just the welfare of their children, but to be seen to be putting the welfare of their children first. And if the prevailing mood in the press and public opinion is that travel is dangerous for whatever reason, it's very, very tough for them to be flying in the face of it. The good news is that things are a lot less jittery than they used to be. The idea that we could be looking at a major return to volume for European tourism overall, whilst there is a land war taking place in Europe, is absolutely inconceivable if you look at it in terms of demand patterns of the 80s and 90s. There's real resistance. There's a sort of real resilience to this demand. Those of us who started in this industry many years ago would never have imagined. So that's heartening. Anyway, on that subject, Tim, you mentioned a 90% return level for 23. How much of this is based on previous years' cancellations returning? So is this a sugar rush we've got of kids coming in who we had stored up in the background, or is this sort of proper organic demand?
No, it's a small sugar rush, put it that way. I'd say the reality is that a lot of this is organic. You do find we had a lot travel in 2022. So I think we got a lot of that sugar rush out then. 23 is mostly organic new groups that are materializing, with some of that sugar coming from the back end. And like I said, 2024 is 100% brand new, and we're really seeing a robust start. So I don't think a lot of it's the past catching up. One other thing that is hitting our market, though, just to follow up on that, is there's a stronger emphasis from our clients to give more CFAR or cancel for any reason alternatives in the mix to avoid any type of penalties or loss in the past. So I think that's a stronger in the market demand to offset some of the concerns they have around money being paid, and also, of course, the demands for health and safety.
Yeah, I could add a little bit too about that. That the statistics that we showed at the beginning, where from our previous business barometer for student travel. And we are just wrapping up taking in new statistics right now that will be then available for, I think, in March, by the end of March, there'll be more statistics on kind of what, what is new, what is returning. But I'm with you, Tim, that I think most of it is, organic, new inquiries that, we've kind of put the cancellations to bed.
Okay, thanks. Adele, do you have anything to add to that, or?
No, I completely concur with the comment.
The question from Joanna Oluwadul. What type of activities and programs do these groups request, and what do they explore? It's a very big question to cover, but Adele, do you want to start off with it? Apart from everything.
Well, it's a very good question, and as Tom said, it's quite extensive. I think, though, what we generally find is that we can kind of segment them into loose buckets. So, for instance, educational type of activities. So those will depend a little bit on the destination, but they will be usually historical or cultural in nature. So, for example, quite a sort of big niche within that could be battlefields tours, for instance. So groups, particularly from Canada, actually studying World War I and II, going to France and Belgium to look at those particular sites, and then things connected to that. So you would have a sort of historical element to things. You could then have cultural, so it could be a language or a class studying Spanish. They might want to come and do activities where they're practicing their Spanish and they're learning about Spanish culture, for instance. So that in a very short space of time is the sort of historical content. We also would have groups that may be performance tours. So another big reason for coming is for the school choir or orchestra or chamber orchestra or wind band, marching band as well, sometimes to come and not only do the normal kind of cultural sightseeing, but also to perform. And this could be in cathedrals, it could be in local schools, it could be in a festival or a parade that's going on. As an example, the St. Patrick's Day Parade in Dublin usually has a good number of US and Canadian marching bands in it that have come to take part. And then there's other groups that come for very, very specific reasons, some kind of immersion in agricultural studies or something like that, that would be a little bit more technical visits, perhaps, for when they're studying, maybe at the college level, not just the school level. They might want to come and spend 2 or 3 weeks really immersing in a particular field of study. So I don't know if that answers the question, or whether Marcy and Tim have anything to add, but it's Europe's culture, Europe's history, languages, diversity that is attracting these groups to come and take the things they've learned in the classroom and actually see the places where these things happened is probably one of the driving factors.
Yeah, I would agree, Adele, and add to, and it's also back to a tip a little bit to connecting with these groups is attaching yourself to an event of some sort. So whether it's a music festival or a tournament or a conference, like a different, there's a lot of different student events happening worldwide, World Youth Days, and like just a lot of different events where if you can connect with something like that, that you can, the students will, I kind of used to say with music that, if there's a festival, they will come. It's the same with other educational, components. If there's something happening, then you can build some pre-post opportunities for travel to see the destination. And also, I noticed with that question that I think that was from someone who specializes in sustainable tourism. So as I mentioned, I think trying to go out into the communities and at the grassroots level, connecting with maybe even sustainable enterprises. So I know we had more of our women's adult groups going to small villages in Africa and meeting a beading cooperative and connecting with them. We're seeing more interest from the school market in those types of experiences where they're really getting in and connecting to like a sustainable enterprise. So that's just a thought too for you in the sustainable area.
Fine, thank you very much for that. I've been reading through the questions, which are generously eccentric at times. We have someone called Etienne Mapichard who is saying hello from Paris. It's not a question, more a statement. If anybody knows Etienne, she's saying hello. The question, which is, do tour operators have benefits booking hotels in intercity transfers for students? I'm tempted to answer that myself, but do you want to give a quick answer? Do you get discounts from hotels and intercity transfers because you're carrying students? Adele?
Not usually. I mean, in the sense of group rates, yes, but there's not usually. I think Marcy, you even alluded to that earlier. That's one thing. You know, we as we said, the cost of these trips is high and significant. There's a lot of elements to it, and whilst it's a resilient market financially, then where there are young person, especially under 18, discounts. I know there often are for attractions, but less so for hotels and transport. Then you know, those are always very welcome to the young people traveling, for sure.
Okay. I think to give Etienne Machichal her credit, she did follow up with a question, which is, do you mainly book via DMCs or do you directly contract hotels? And are hostels, shared accommodation, still an option after COVID? Tim, do you want to kick off with that, and we'll go around?
Yep. So we as a company, every company is different. We as World Strides have a lot of locations where we book direct. So Europe to us is generally a direct book location, destination, I should say. Doesn't mean we go exclusively with direct book. There are times we leverage some DMCs, so destination management companies. DMCs might be more there if it's a region we don't travel to as frequently, or if there's some specialty attached to it, like some of these really unique performing groups might need a DMC who specializes in that. So we do leverage those type of pieces quite a bit. So I think it really depends. If you go most of the rest of the world, not a lot of places where we go direct. We do leverage a lot of the DMC destinations.
Adele?
We as a receptive will do things directly ourselves, but like Tim said, there are times when we work with other partners to, especially in areas we don't know so well, or when there's been significant change or some major event taking place. None of us have touched on Olympics in France next year, but that's something that as anybody in the industry is looking at is managing big events like that and that sort of thing. So. But that said, we do talk to tourist boards and tourist offices regularly about those destinations as well, because they can help with what's going on and new openings and that sort of thing.
And Marcia, just to go back to the question, are you still booking shared accommodation? I think the implication is not just people sharing a twin room, but staying in dormitories. Is this something which you feature, or has the demand for that changed since COVID has arrived?
Mm-hmm. I mean, yes, I think it went through, we went through a period where there was less, comfort with that. I would say from a Canadian perspective, that's a little to be determined for next year. Still, it's, we are seeing a little less, even Canadian students would have shared bed accommodation, and we're seeing a little bit more, one student per bed situation, which in Europe is, more common anyway, because we're dealing with twin and so on. But we would book directly with hotels and in some cases hostels. That's sometimes more of a school board decision as well, if they're comfortable with that. So it's a bit to be determined for us as far as post-COVID on the shared accommodation.
Right. Okay. I'm going to just fly through these questions because they're now flooding in, which is just as we're running short on time. They all arrive, which is good. I represent the Tourist Board of Turin. They mentioned it's a university city and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Could you list the top 5 reasons for using the student travel to Italy? Both give you your top 2, and I'm afraid someone's going to bag the first 2 obvious ones. But let's start with Adele, if I may. Adele, what are your top 2 reasons for going to Italy if you're a student and youth group?
Top 2 reasons would be the history Roman through to modern times, and food.
Marcia.
I would say, I mean, we go have a lot of our groups that go to Italy for the performing and the arts, opportunities, often combining a little bit with other, peripheral countries, but definitely music is a big part. And as Adele mentioned, there's some remembrance travel that happens in Italy as well for the Canadian history too.
And Tim.
Yeah, tough one to go last on. I think the food is obviously a huge part of it. The cultural immersion is a huge part of it as well. One thing that's a little different is we also offer sport programs. So a lot of the European football, basketball programs, Italy is becoming a big destination of question for that area. So I think we're going to see some development in that area as well.
Well, you've got 6, and I'm going to add a 7th, which is the architecture and painting. The painting, sculpture, and architecture of Italy is quite significant in its appeal, I'd have thought, from a school group point of view. You've got several options. Right, we're going to race forward. They're going, is there a chance to develop new itineraries, including more sustainable attractions, or do the tour operators stick to their pre-COVID itineraries? So the implication there is, has COVID driven a more diverse, more sustainable demand? Or is it still bucket list, is the short question. Tim, why don't you start with that?
Yeah, thank you. So what we're finding is we are addressing sustainability at the service level rather than the destination level, because I think we're trying to make sure that our students are demanding it. And I think that's a mission critical piece of it. So you're going to see that we're starting to go through more checklists with each of our suppliers about how they're progressing around what we consider the key sustainable areas. And we're doing our best to select a blend of suppliers that are constantly moving that needle. In addition to that, all of us, whether it's airlines or vendors, are working hard to improve our sustainability. So I think if you look at our sustainability rating per tour, naturally, I think we're progressing in the right direction. And us trying to work with our partners to improve sustainability at their level is also a way that we're helping to move that needle as a tour industry. So I think a different way to answer it, but I think that's the most impactful way that we're finding today.
Does anybody want to add to that, or can we move forward? You okay with that? Okay. What are the main B2B events? Oh, sorry. What are the main B2B events European inbound companies should attend to reach North American outbound agencies? Well, I think there are 1 or 2 that ETOA run, and indeed this webinar is part to promote the North American marketplace webinar, which is taking place later this year. But anybody wanting to know more details of that should look on our website. I'm sure that CITA have similar events. Am I correct, Marcia?
Yes.
Okay, well, those are the 2 obvious ones. Social tourism. When it comes to student and youth travel, does the panel feel that more could be done to enable student and youth group travel who don't fall into the middle class sector, but could find the same life-enhancing benefits of an educational tour to Europe? So, what is to be done for the people who can't afford the big buck European tour? It's a question.
I mean, I can. Yeah.
Please shoot.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's obviously an important piece of travel, and the CITA does have an arm called the CITA Youth Foundation, which does provide scholarships and opportunities for youth who have barriers financially to be a part of the trip. So that is one resource that we can offer in this way.
I think personally that's a great question as well. And as Tim mentioned earlier, I think the sort of starting price is about $3,000 for a kid to go on a European trip. A big part of that is airline costs, which is something none of us can do anything about, unfortunately. But going back to an earlier point, there are a significant number of European museums that offer free or very discounted entry for young people, and that sort of thing really does help. And it's up to us as operators as well to help work on itineraries that maybe are more focused on some of those elements, which still is a very, very rich and diverse itinerary. But as I said, a key part of that is airline pricing, and that's a challenge, definitely, as we move into 23 and 24 for sure.
I'm just flying through the questions. Do you have much demand for Portugal? Is there much demand for Portugal?
Yeah, I wouldn't say much. It's not one of our top destinations in Europe, but I think we are seeing demand increase, is a fair way to say it. So it's been a nice price point for us over the last few years, and it's also of more demand combining with some of the other countries that we travel to. So it is increasing, yes.
Yeah, we've seen the same.
Okay. And the last remark was from our repeated question, who's a force within the educational industry, a gentleman by the name of Mike Clark, who makes the point fairly valid that fundraising in the community to help those people who can't normally afford these trips is a big phenomenon in North America. Absolutely fantastic. We've more or less finished on time, I would say. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you, Adele. Thank you, Marcia. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, audience. Just to stress that this event is brought to you by ETOA in conjunction with CITA. It's really to support the online workshop. So those of you asking about workshops, we have an online workshop which tour operators are free to join, but there is fairly advantageous prices for suppliers wanting to talk to those intermediaries. This is going to take place on the 21st of March, and it's online. So we already have people prepared to dial in from Seattle all the way down, all the way down to Florida. So it's a pan North American, further north than Seattle, sorry, from British Columbia down to Florida. It's done in conjunction with Cato, it's done in conjunction with CITA, it's done in conjunction with USTOA and the European Travel Commission. So we try to cover as many bases as possible. So if you want a workshop, the 21st of March is it. Thank you, everybody. Particular thank you to the panel. This will be up on the website together with the slide deck in due course. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.